3 weeks before my wedding, I was brought into the sitting room of my parents' house and asked to stand straight, to turn slowly, to hold out my hands with the palms turned up. A man I had spoken to 4 times in my whole life looked at me the way a man looks at a field he is thinking about buying. My mother was in the room, an older woman from the Jime was in the room, and not once, at any point, did anyone ask me how I felt about any of it. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I tell you the things that were never meant to leave the kitchen. My name is Sadie. I was born plain in Lancaster County, baptized at 18, married at 19, a mother of 2 before I was 23, and I have been out of the old order for a little more than a year now. I am going to tell you what happened in that sitting room, the part it took me years to be able to say out loud. What my own mother did with her 2 hands while that man looked me over. But first I need you to understand the house I am about to take you into, and the way a girl in it is taught, long before any inspection, to hold herself still. So stay with me. Don't just pass through. Tell me where you are watching from tonight, and tell me this if you can carry it. Were you ever taught that your body belonged to everyone in the room except you? Add your voice so that the next girl, the one standing in some sitting room right now holding out her hands, knows she was never the only one. The morning of the day they would look at me, I looked at myself first. There was one mirror in my parents' house, a small square of glass no bigger than a man's hand, screwed to the wall above the washstand, hung low enough for my father to trim his beard, and for nothing else. We did not keep mirrors the way the English do. A mirror is for studying yourself, and studying yourself is hochmut, pride, the chief sin, the trapdoor under every Amish girl's feet. I was 19, and I could not have told you the true color of my own eyes without going to that glass to check. That morning, before anyone else was up, I went and checked. I stood in front of that little square with the kerosene lamp still throwing its long, soft shadow up the plain wall, and I did to myself, quietly, what I knew they would do to me later, out loud. I made sure my cap was pinned straight, no hair slipped from the bun, my hair, never once cut in my life, wound tight under the white cap that told the world I was a woman who yields. I smoothed the front of my dark dress, the straight pins of it cold under my fingers, no buttons, no zipper, nothing that could be called ornament. And I turned a little, this way and that, the way you turn when you are trying to see yourself the way another person will see you. I want you to understand what I was really doing in front of that glass. I was not getting ready. I was appraising. At 19, I had already learned, so deep down it did not feel like learning at all, to step outside my own body and grade it the way a man grades a heifer at the spring mud sale. Is she sound? Is she strong? Will she work? I did it to myself in that little mirror so that I would pass when they did it to me in the sitting room. By the time anyone inspected me, I had already been taught to inspect myself. I had been raised for that morning since before I could read. In our district, a girl is not raised to become a person. She is raised to become useful, and to become useful quietly. The Lassenheit, we call it, yieldedness, the highest virtue a woman can have. A Demutic woman is low and soft-spoken and unnoticed, and that is what you are praised for. By 14, when school ended the way it ends for every old order child, I could cook for a harvest crew, can 48 quarts of tomatoes in an afternoon, run the wringer washer, and make correct change out of the tin cash box at the produce stand. What I could not do was want anything that was only mine. There had never been a place to put a want like that. My mother smelled of wood smoke and the lye soap she made herself in a kettle in the yard. I can call up that smell faster than I can call up her face. She was not a cruel woman. I need you to hear me say that early and mean it. She was the one who delivered the community's verdicts in our kitchen, sideways, never to your face, and her whole worth was measured by how well her daughters learned to yield. She had been measured that way too, once. So had her mother. It was the only inheritance the women in my family had to pass down, and they passed it carefully, the way you pass down a quilt. The dark blue wedding dress was already sewn by then. It hung from a nail on the back of my bedroom door. We had no closets. You hung your life on nails, plain, hemmed below the knee, nothing a tourist would ever recognize as a wedding dress. I would be married in November, on a Thursday after the harvest, at my father's farm, in front of nearly 300 people, with roast chicken and creamed celery and 7 kinds of pie, and no rings, because we wear the marriage on no finger, and no music, because the only singing we do is the low bleed, dragged out of the old ausbund, one held syllable at a time. My younger sister Rebecca was 12 then. She watched our mother fit that dress to me, and I did not think, that day, about what she was learning by watching. I think about it now more than almost anything. Here is the truest thing about that house. I went into that sitting room already believing the looking was for my own good. I believed it the way you believe the ground is solid. Nobody has to argue you into the things you learn that young. They become the shape of the floor you walk on. So let me show you the machinery underneath the floor, because the inspection did not come out of nowhere. It came out of a whole way of seeing a woman that was older than my mother and older than her mother, and it had a logic to it, and the logic is the part that should frighten you, more than any one cruel person ever could. In the old order, a marriage is not a romance. We did not pretend it was. A marriage is the founding of a household and a farm and a line of children who will keep the Ordnung after you are gone. The Ordnung, the unwritten code of the district, what you may wear and drive and own and do, is never written down. That is the whole point of it. It lives in the community's knowing and is enforced by the community's watching. And a wife is, in the plainest sense, the engine of that household. So before a man takes a wife, it is only sensible, that is the word, sensible, that the suitability of the engine be confirmed. Is she strong? Is she healthy? Are her hands a worker's hands? Will she bear and raise and can and cook and yield for 40 years without complaint? Nobody ever said those words to me. They did not have to. That was the genius of the thing. The whole evaluation could be carried out in a sitting room in 20 minutes without one honest sentence being spoken, because everyone in the room already knew the script, and the only person whose feelings were not part of the script was the girl standing in the middle of it. That is what I mean when I say the absence of my feelings was not an accident. It was not that they forgot to ask how I felt. There was no place in the procedure for how I felt. My body was the thing being examined. My inside life was simply not part of the evaluation. You do not ask the field how it feels about the plow, and the cruelest turn of it, the turn it took me the longest to see, is how the women carried it. It was not the men who taught me to fold myself up and present myself for inspection. It was the women. It was my mother and her sisters and the older women of the Gmay. the ones who had survived their own sitting rooms and their own wedding nights, and who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the only mercy they could offer the next girl was to make sure she was ready. To soften it would have been to admit it should not exist, and admitting that would have broken them, because they had already paid for it with their whole lives. I will get to that sitting room. I promise you I will. But I have to tell you about Lydia first, because without Lydia, I would not have understood, years later, what I had stood through. Lydia was an old woman in our district, past 70, with hands like roots. At a barn raising, a frolic we call it, where the men build and the women cook and everyone watches everyone, I was carrying a tray to the long tables behind the barn, and Lydia was there laying out bread, and she spoke to me without ever once turning to look at my face. That is how our women say the things that cannot be said. To the bread, to the field, to their own hands. She said, "Child, when I was 17, they stood me in my father's front room and turned me around for a man and his mother like I was a horse at a sale. I held my hands out." And then she set down the bread, and she said, quieter, "Nobody ever asked me, not in 51 years of marriage, what I would have chosen. I am only telling you so that you know it was done to me too." And she walked away and never spoke of it again. I was already married by the day Lydia told me that. It was too late to be a warning. It was something else. It was a witness. Her sitting room was 50 years before mine, and it was the same room. That is when I began to understand that nothing that had happened to me was personal. It was a machine, and I had gone through it the way every woman ahead of me had gone through it, and the women I loved had run the machine because no one had ever shown them how to turn it off. Now I will take you into the room. It was 3 weeks before the Hochzeit. In the front sitting room, the one we used only for church and for serious things. A man was coming with his mother to confirm the match, and an older woman from the Gemai was there as well, a witness, the way there is always a witness. I had spoken to this man 4 times in my life, buggy rides home from the Sunday singing, 2 bundling visits in this very house, the 2 of us nearly silent and fully clothed, while my parents sat in the next room. He had spoken to my father long before he ever truly spoke to me. I was told to stand straight, so I stood straight. I was told to turn, slowly, so that I could be seen from all sides, and I turned. And then I was told to hold out my hands, palms up, so the work in them could be judged, whether they were a strong woman's hands, whether they had canned and milked and scrubbed, whether they would last. And I held them out, my own 2 palms, turned up to the ceiling, open, in front of a man I barely knew, while he looked at me the way you look at a thing you are deciding the price of. And here is the moment. Here is the thing I could not say out loud for years. Something in me, some small animal that the Ordnung had not quite killed, wanted to lower my hands, wanted to fold my arms across myself, to turn away, to step back out of the middle of that room. I felt it move in me like a flinch, and my mother saw it. My mother, who knew me, who had smelled of wood smoke my whole life, who had fit that blue dress to my shoulders, my mother stepped in behind me, and she put her 2 hands on my shoulders, warm and certain, the hands that had braided my hair and bound my wounds, and she held me still. She held me there. She kept me in place and turned slightly toward him so that I could be seen properly. She did not do it roughly. She did it gently. That is the part that takes the breath out of me even now. She did it the way you steady a child for the doctor, believing all the way down that the steadying is love. I stood there, held still by my own mother's hands, and offered up for a stranger to assess. And the small animal in me lay back down, because if my own mother was holding me there, then it must be right. That is what her hands told me. Be still. This is how it is done. This is how you are loved. The man nodded. They talked over my head in Deutsch about practical things. The match was confirmed, though it had really been confirmed weeks before, in rooms I was never invited into. The sitting room was only the ceremony of it. And then I went back to the kitchen, picked up whatever I had set down, and went on with the day. And I did not cry, because I did not yet have the first idea that anything had been done to me at all. There is a word for what that was. My English therapist gave it to me slowly, the way you feed broth to someone who has not eaten in a long time. One word at a time. She said the words, bodily autonomy, and she let me sit with them until I understood they meant a thing I had never once been told I owned. And later, when I told her about my mother's hands on my shoulders, she was quiet a while, and then she said, consent that is not consent. Because the cost of saying no had been made so total that the no was never really available to me. You cannot refuse from inside a body you were taught does not belong to you, held still by the one person on earth you trust. I want to say the thing the system needs you not to say. My mother was not a villain. Jonas, that man, my husband, the father of my children, was not a villain either. He stood in that room and let me be turned and inspected because it was the only script for taking a wife his world had ever handed him, and he followed it the way he had been taught, the same way I followed mine. He did not know there was another way to begin a marriage any more than I did, and my mother held me still because she had been held still once herself, in a front room 40 years away, by hands that also believed they were being kind. She was not breaking me. She was passing down the only survival she knew, and she called it love, and some part of it even was. That is the worst of it. That is why it works. The machine runs on women who love their daughters. I live alone now, in a small apartment in the city of Lancaster, 20 minutes and an entire universe from Gordonville. I left with one suitcase a little over a year ago, and the ban came down exactly the way Lydia told me the shunning would, only larger. My mother crosses to the far side of the street in town when she sees me. The letters I send her come back unopened, the address in my own hand. The Maydung is faithful that way. I am not divorced in the eyes of my people. I am banned. There is a difference, and the difference is that to them I am not gone. I am worse than gone. I am a warning. In this apartment there is a mirror. A real one, full length, the kind the English hang without a second thought. For weeks after I moved here, I could not stand in front of it. The first few times I tried, my hands came up on their own and started checking. Cap pinned straight, hair smooth, dress true, except there was no cap anymore, and my hair was down, never been cut, falling loose the way it never once fell in 26 years, and I stood there with my own hands halfway up, and I made myself put them down. I made myself just look. Not appraise. Look. It is the hardest thing I have learned to do, and I am still learning it. To stand in front of a glass and see a person instead of a heifer at a sale, and my hands. These 2 palms I held out in that sitting room. I have had to teach them to hold different things. a library card with my own chosen name printed on it, the first object I ever held that was only mine. A pen in a black notebook, English, where I write the things that were never supposed to leave the kitchen. A cup of coffee I made because I wanted it, at an hour I chose, for no one but me. They are still a worker's hands, but they are not for sale anymore, and they are not held still by anyone, and they are mine. I have to tell you the part that does not heal, because I will not lie to you to make this end softer. I have 2 children. Levi is 6, Annie is 4. They are a few miles from here, on Jonas's farm, being raised by the whole Gamai to understand that their mother is lost. I see them a handful of careful, painful times a year. They are being taught the same things I was taught. Annie is being taught right now to fold herself up small and useful and quiet, to be ready someday for a sitting room of her own. And I left her there. I could not see a way to take them and survive, and a disappeared mother is not much of a mother to take anyone anywhere. Some of what was taken cannot be returned. I carry that every single day, and I will not dress it up for you. A woman wrote to me once and asked how I could possibly call any of this freedom when my children are still inside. I do not have a clean answer. The freedom is real, and it is incomplete, both at the same time, and I have stopped needing it to be only one of those things. So I want to speak to you now, whoever you are. If you ever stood in a room and felt your hands want to come up to cover you, and made them stay down because everyone there expected you to be still, I see you. If you were ever held in place, gently, lovingly, by someone you trusted, and offered up for someone else's judgment, I see you. If you ever learned to inspect yourself before anyone else could, so that you would pass, I see you. I did it too, in a square of glass, before the sun was up. And if you are a mother who put your hands on your own daughter's shoulders one day, because it was done to you, and you knew no other way to keep her safe, I see you too. The machine was never yours. You were caught in it the same as I was. Hear me on this one thing, the thing it took me 26 years and a stranger's quiet office to learn. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was. It did not need their permission, and it never did. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.